One monk carried a woman across a river for 30 seconds. The other monk carried her in his mind for 30 miles. By the end of their journey, one was at peace. The other was drowning in a river that no longer existed. This ancient story holds the secret to freeing yourself from the prison of your own thoughts. Let me tell you what happened. Stay with me until the end. In a distant land where mist wrapped around mountain peaks like sleeping dragons and ancient temples hid among whispering bamboo forests, there stood a monastery known for its unbreakable discipline. The monks who lived there had renounced pleasure, comfort, and the touch of the outside world. They lived by rules carved in stone centuries ago, and they followed those rules as if their souls depended on it. Among them was an old monk named Tanzan. He had spent 40 years in meditation, his body growing weathered like driftwood, his eyes becoming soft like morning light on still water. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words landed like seeds in fertile soil. People said that Tanzan had discovered something most people spend their whole lives searching for. He walked through the world as if nothing could disturb the stillness inside him. Walking beside him was a young monk named Aikido, brilliant, devoted, obsessed with perfection. Aikido knew every rule of their sacred order by heart. He could recite scriptures until the candles burned to nothing. He woke before the sun, meditated until his legs went numb, and watched himself constantly for any sign of failure. Yet despite his discipline, there was a storm behind his eyes. His mind was a courtroom that never closed, always putting himself and others on trial, always searching for violations, always keeping score. One autumn morning, the two monks set out on a journey to a distant temple. The path wound through golden forests and over ancient hills. Fallen leaves crunched beneath their sandals like whispered secrets. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and earth. For hours, they walked in comfortable silence, two figures moving through a painting. Then they came to a river. It was not wide, but recent rains had turned it treacherous. The current pulled hungrily at the banks. The riverbed had become a pit of thick, sucking mud, and standing at the water's edge, frozen with distress, was a young woman. She was dressed in an elegant silk kimono, pale blue with silver embroidery, clearly a noble woman. Her shoes were too delicate for mud, her clothes too fine for water. She stared at the river as if it were a monster blocking her path, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Aikido saw her and immediately looked away. The rules were clear. A monk must not touch a woman. A monk must not look too long at a woman. A monk must guard his purity at all costs. These commandments were branded into Aikido's mind. He would sooner stop breathing than break them. He expected Tanzan to walk past her without a word. Instead, Tanzan walked directly toward her. "May I help you cross?" he asked, his voice gentle and unhurried. Before she could fully answer, Tanzan lifted her onto his shoulders. His worn robes pressed against her silk kimono. His aged hands steadied her weight. He waded into the muddy water without hesitation, his sandals disappearing into the muck, the cold current swirling around his legs. The woman held on tightly, her fingers gripping his shoulders. On the other side, he set her down as gently as placing a bird on a branch. She bowed deeply, her eyes filled with gratitude, and walked away toward the village without looking back. Tanzan watched her go for exactly one breath. Then he turned and continued walking, his face as calm as an undisturbed lake. He did not mention what had happened. He did not explain himself. He simply moved forward, as if the moment had already become part of the past. Aikido stood paralyzed on the riverbank. His mind detonated. Did that just happen? Did his senior monk, the one he had revered for years, just shatter their most sacred vow, in broad daylight, without a flicker of shame? Aikido crossed the river alone, his jaw locked tight enough to crack teeth. He said nothing, but inside his skull, a war had begun. They walked on, 1 mile, 3 miles, 7 miles. The forest changed around them. Golden maples gave way to dark pines. Sunlight faded into shadow and returned again. Birds announced the afternoon with songs Aikido could not hear. He was no longer on the path. He was trapped inside his own head, watching the same scene play over and over on an endless loop. He saw Tanzan lifting her. He saw her hands on his shoulders. He saw the rules crumbling. He saw sin. He saw betrayal. He saw everything he had been taught collapsing into the mud of that riverbank. And with each replay, his fury grew hotter, his judgment grew sharper, his mental arguments grew louder. How could Tanzan call himself a monk? Was his entire life a lie? Should Aikido report him to the monastery elders? Was staying silent a sin in itself? Did this mean nothing they practiced was real? The questions bred like insects, crawling into every corner of his consciousness, giving him no moment of rest. 15 miles, 20 miles, 25 miles. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in bruised purples and burning oranges. Akido's shoulders ached from tension. His stomach churned with acid. His peaceful pilgrimage had become a torture chamber built entirely from his own thoughts. Finally, as the first stars appeared and the lights of a village flickered in the distance, Akido could hold it no longer. He exploded. Tanzan. His voice cracked through the evening silence like a whip. How could you do that? We are monks. We have sacred vows. We are forbidden from touching women. You lifted her onto your shoulders like the rules mean nothing. How could you betray everything we stand for? Tanzan stopped walking. He turned slowly, his silhouette framed against the darkening sky. His face held no defensiveness, no guilt, no shame. He looked at Akido the way the moon looks at a restless sea, with patience that has witnessed 1,000 storms. Brother, Tanzan said, his voice soft as falling leaves. I set that woman down at the riverbank many hours ago. He paused. The silence between them grew thick enough to touch. Why are you still carrying her? The words struck Akido like lightning to the chest. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in hours, his mind went completely silent. The courtroom inside his head suddenly had no case to argue. The judge had left. The jury had vanished. Only stillness remained. And in that stillness, the truth flooded in. Tanzan had touched the woman for 30 seconds. He had helped a stranger, set her down, and continued his journey. For him, the moment ended at the riverbank. There was no crime. There was no crisis. There was nothing to carry. But Akido had been carrying that woman for 30 miles. He had replayed the scene 500 times. He had tried her, convicted her, and sentenced Tanzan in a court that existed only between his ears. He had suffered for hours in a river he had physically left behind long ago. The woman was not his burden. Tanzan was not his burden. His own mind was his burden. He had invented a problem from a moment that had already dissolved into the past, like morning mist. Tears welled in Akido's eyes. Not from sadness, but from the sudden lightness of release. A chain he had not known he was wearing fell away. I understand, he whispered. I finally understand. Tanzan smiled and placed a weathered hand on Akido's shoulder. The practice is not to never pick anything up, brother. The practice is knowing when to set it down. They walked the final mile in silence. But this time Akido was truly present. He heard the crickets singing. He felt the cool air kissing his skin. He saw the stars scattered across the heavens like diamonds on black silk. For the first time in hours, he was actually alive on the path, instead of lost in the maze of his mind. So let me ask you something. What are you still carrying? What conversation from last week is still looping in your head? What insult from years ago still burns in your chest? What mistake from your past do you replay every night before sleep? What future disaster are you rehearsing that has not even happened yet? The woman is gone. The river is behind you. That moment ended long ago, but you might still be standing there, soaking wet, holding something you could have released miles ago. The heaviest chains are not made of iron, they are made of thoughts. And unlike iron, they vanish the instant you choose to stop holding them. What will you set down today? The river is behind you. The path is ahead. Walk forward. Your peace is waiting on the other side.